Look up at the sky right now, and you might see a Boeing 737 cruising at 35,000 feet. That's definitely an aircraft, right? But what about a hot air balloon? Is that an aircraft? What about a drone with no pilot inside? Or a hang glider with no engine at all? And here's a tricky one. Is a rocket an aircraft? The answer to what is an aircraft seems obvious until you really think about it. Today, we're going to define exactly what qualifies as an aircraft, explore the fundamental categories, and understand what separates aircraft from everything else that flies.
Let's start with the official definition. According to the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, an aircraft is defined as any machine that can derive support in the atmosphere from the reactions of the air other than the reactions of the air against the Earth's surface.
Let's break that down because it's more precise than it sounds. First, derive support in the atmosphere. This means the machine stays up by interacting with the air around it. Second, reactions of the air other than reactions against the Earth's surface. This is crucial. It excludes vehicles like hovercraft, which stay up by pushing air against the ground. Aircraft stay up by interacting with the air itself, not the surface below. So, according to this definition, this is what we have as aircraft and non-aircrafts. But here's where it gets interesting. Notice the definition says, in the atmosphere. Once a vehicle leaves the atmosphere and operates in space, it's technically a spacecraft, not an aircraft, though many spacecraft function as aircraft during launch and landing, like the Space Shuttle did. The Space Shuttle was both an aircraft in the atmosphere, a spacecraft in orbit. All aircraft fall into two fundamental categories based on how they stay in the air. Category 1. Lighter-than-air aircraft, also called aerostats. These aircraft float because they're literally lighter than the air around them. They use buoyancy, the same principle that makes a beach ball float in water. Hot air balloons work by heating air inside a large envelope. Hot air is less dense than cold air, so the balloon rises. Airships and blimps use gases like helium or hydrogen, which are naturally lighter than air. And here's something most people don't know. Lighter-than-air craft were actually the first successful aircraft. The Montgolfier brothers flew a hot air balloon in 1783. That's 120 years before the Wright brothers. The famous Hindenburg was a massive lighter-than-air airship. Its tragic 1937 disaster essentially ended the era of passenger airships. Today, lighter-than-air aircraft are mostly used for advertising, aerial observation, and some scientific research. Category 2. Heavier-than-air aircraft, also called aerodynes. These aircraft weigh more than the air they displace. A Boeing 747 can weigh over 400 tons. There's no way that's floating. So how do they stay up? They generate lift by moving through the air. That movement creates aerodynamic forces that overcome their weight. Think about birds. They're heavier than air. They stay up by moving their wings through the air, generating lift. Heavier-than-air aircraft split into two subcategories. Powered aircraft have engines, airplanes, helicopters, jets. Unpowered aircraft, no engines, gliders, hang gliders. But here's the key. Even unpowered aircraft need some movement through the air to generate lift. Gliders use gravity and air currents. They're constantly descending through the air mass around them, even when they appear to be climbing relative to the ground.
Here's the fundamental difference you need to remember. Lighter-than-air aircraft can hover without moving. They're in equilibrium with the air around them. They simply float. Heavier-than-air aircraft must be constantly moving through the air, or in the case of helicopters, constantly moving air around them to stay up. Stop the movement and they fall. Even when an airplane's engines fail, it doesn't drop like a stone. It becomes a glider, still generating lift as it descends. But it must keep moving through the air. This distinction is crucial to understanding everything else about aviation. Lighter than aircraft use static lift from buoyancy. Heavier than aircraft use dynamic lift from movement.
Now let's dive deeper into heavier than air aircraft, because this is where it gets really interesting. The most common type. These aircraft have rigid wings that don't flap or rotate. The wings are shaped, we call it an airfoil, to create lower pressure above and higher pressure below as air flows past. This pressure difference generates lift. Fixed-wing aircraft include commercial airliners like the Boeing 737 or Airbus A380, private planes like Cessnas, military jets like the F-22 Raptor, cargo aircraft like the C-130 Hercules, and gliders and sailplanes. They're the fastest and most efficient type for long-distance travel. Commercial jets cruise at about 550 miles per hour. Military fighters can exceed 1,500 miles per hour. The trade-off? Most fixed-wing aircraft need runways. They must build up speed to generate enough lift. These aircraft use rotating wings, we call them rotor blades, to generate lift. The rotor blades are actually just wings that spin. As they rotate, they create the same aerodynamic lift that fixed wings create, but the aircraft doesn't need to move forward to generate it. This is the huge advantage of rotary-wing aircraft. They can hover, take off vertically, land in tiny spaces, and fly in any direction, including backwards. Tilt rotors, like the V-22 Osprey, can tilt their rotors to fly like either a helicopter or an airplane. Autogyros, also called gyrocopters, have unpowered rotors that spin from the airflow itself. The trade-off? They're slower and less fuel efficient than fixed-wing aircraft. Maximum speeds are typically 150 to 200 miles per hour. They're also mechanically complex. A helicopter has thousands of moving parts in its rotor system alone, making them expensive to maintain. These aircraft have no engines at all. They rely entirely on external energy sources. Gliders, also called sailplanes, are towed into the air by powered aircraft or launched from high ground. Once airborne, skilled pilots use rising air currents called thermals to stay aloft. Thermals are columns of warm air rising from sun-heated ground. Glider pilots circle within these thermals to climb, then glide to the next one. Expert glider pilots can stay airborne for hours and travel hundreds of miles with no engine. Hang gliders and paragliders are simpler, lighter, unpowered aircraft. The pilot hangs beneath a wing and uses body weight to steer. This is a special category for aircraft that can take off and land vertically, like helicopters, but fly forward like airplanes. The Harrier uses rotating engine nozzles to direct thrust downward for vertical flight, then rotates them backward for conventional flight. The F-35B uses a similar system with even more advanced technology. And many future flying car and air taxi concepts are powered lift aircraft, combining helicopter-like takeoff with airplane-like cruise efficiency. Now let's clear up the confusion. What is not an aircraft? Because the boundaries can be tricky. Rockets and spacecraft. Rockets operate primarily outside the atmosphere. They don't use air for support. They use thrust to overcome gravity directly. In space, there's no air. Rockets work by Newton's third law, expelling mass in one direction to accelerate in the other. Missiles. Guided missiles are technically aircraft by definition. They derive support from air reactions, but they're classified separately as munitions.
Some missiles, like cruise missiles, are essentially small unmanned aircraft. Others, like ballistic missiles, are more like rockets. Drones and UAVs. Are drones aircraft? Yes, absolutely. The fact that they're unmanned doesn't change anything. They still derive support from air reactions. The official term is UAV, Unmanned Aerial Vehicle, or UAS, Unmanned Aircraft System. Notice, aircraft is right there in the name. Drones range from tiny toys weighing ounces to military drones with wingspans over 130 feet, larger than a Boeing 737. Hovercraft. Remember our definition? Aircraft derive support from air reactions other than against the Earth's surface. Hovercraft create a cushion of air trapped between the vehicle and the ground. They're pushing air against the surface, so not aircraft. Ground effect vehicles like the Soviet Ikronoplan are borderline. They fly extremely close to the surface using enhanced lift from ground effect. The international aviation community is still debating whether they qualify as aircraft. Wearable flight devices. Jetpacks use thrust like rockets. Most aren't classified as aircraft. Wingsuits generate lift aerodynamically, but they're classified as sport equipment, though technically they meet the definition of an unpowered aircraft. Classification matters because it determines what regulations apply. Despite the huge variety we've just discussed, all aircraft share certain fundamental components or characteristics. 1. A structure to support loads. Every aircraft needs a structure, whether it's the fuselage of an airplane, the basket of a balloon, or the frame of a hang glider. This structure must withstand its own weight, payload, that's passengers, cargo, fuel, aerodynamic forces during flight, landing impacts, and environmental stresses. Materials vary wildly. Commercial jets use aluminum alloys and carbon composites. Ultralight aircraft use fabric over aluminum frames. Hot air balloons use ripstop nylon. 2. A system to generate or use lift. This is what keeps the aircraft in the air. For fixed-wing aircraft, wings shaped to create aerodynamic lift. For rotary-wing, rotating blades. For lighter-than aircraft, buoyancy from heated air or light gases. Even a parachute generates lift aerodynamically. It's technically an unpowered aircraft. 3. A control system. Aircraft need a way to control their movement, though the sophistication varies dramatically. Modern commercial jets have hydraulic flight controls, fly-by-wire computers, and autopilots. A hang glider pilot controls the aircraft simply by shifting their body weight. Hot air balloons are controlled by heating the air to climb and venting hot air to descend. But every aircraft has some method of control, even if it's limited. 4. For powered aircraft, a propulsion system. Powered aircraft need engines to generate thrust. Small aircraft use piston engines turning propellers. Commercial jets use turbofan engines. Helicopters use gas turbines connected through complex transmissions to their rotors. And the newest generation uses electric motors, still developing but rapidly improving. 5. A method of takeoff and landing. Every aircraft needs some way to transition between ground and air. Most airplanes use landing gear and require runways. Helicopters can land almost anywhere flat. Balloons simply descend. Seaplanes land on water. Military carrier aircraft use catapults for launch and arresting cables for landing. Understanding what aircraft are also means understanding how they're officially classified, because this affects regulations and licensing. In the United States, the FAA classifies aircraft. In Europe, it's EASA. Internationally, ICAO sets the standards. Aircraft are classified by weight: ultralight, under 254 pounds with minimal regulation; light sport aircraft, up to 1,320 pounds; small aircraft, under 12,500 pounds;
large aircraft over 12,500 pounds, and heavy aircraft over 300,000 pounds, like the Airbus A380. By purpose, civil aircraft for non-military use, military aircraft for defense, state aircraft for government operations. By operation, commercial, paying passengers or cargo, private, personal use, charter, hired for specific flights, cargo, freight only. Why does this matter? Different categories have different licensing requirements, maintenance standards, operating restrictions, airspace access rules, and safety equipment requirements. A pilot licensed for a small single-engine aircraft can't just jump into a commercial airliner. Each category requires specific training and certification.
What we consider an aircraft has evolved as technology advanced. Early 1900s, only lighter-than aircraft existed. Aircraft meant balloons and dirigibles. 1903 to the 1920s, heavier-than-air powered flight emerged. The definition expanded to include airplanes. The 1940s, helicopters became practical. Rotary-wing aircraft joined the definition. The jet age, aircraft now included vehicles approaching and exceeding the speed of sound. The 2000s to present, drones exploded in variety and capability. Unmanned aircraft created entirely new regulatory challenges. And looking ahead, electric vertical takeoff vehicles and flying cars are blurring categories further. As space tourism develops with vehicles like Spaceship Two, the line between aircraft and spacecraft continues to blur. Aviation authorities constantly update definitions to address emerging technologies. You might be thinking, why does it matter how we define aircraft? Isn't this just semantics? Actually, it matters a lot. Legal framework. If something is classified as an aircraft, specific laws apply. Accidents must be investigated by aviation authorities. Liability rules are different from other vehicles. Licensing. Operating an aircraft requires certification. The type of aircraft determines what licenses and ratings you need. Airspace access. Different aircraft have different airspace privileges. Commercial jets can fly in controlled airspace that ultralight aircraft cannot enter. Insurance and liability. Aircraft insurance is specialized and expensive. Classification directly affects coverage and costs. Innovation. Clear definitions help engineers understand what regulations their new designs will face, which actually shapes how future aircraft are developed. Let's recap the key concepts from today. 1. The official definition. An aircraft derives support in the atmosphere from reactions of the air, excluding reactions against the Earth's surface. 2. Two fundamental categories: lighter than air, aerostats, float using buoyancy; heavier than air, aerodynes, generate lift through movement. 3. Main types: fixed wing, the fastest and most efficient; rotary wing, can hover; unpowered, use air currents; powered lift, vertical takeoff with horizontal flight. 4. Essential components. All aircraft need a structure, a lift generation system, a control system, a propulsion system if powered, and a takeoff and landing method. 5. Classifications matter. Official classifications determine regulations, licensing, operations, and safety standards. From a massive Airbus A380 carrying 500 passengers to a tiny drone weighing a few ounces, they're all aircraft because they all derive their support from the air itself.
Now that we understand what aircraft are, we need to understand how they stay in the air. In the next episode, we're diving into the 4 forces of flight: lift, weight, thrust, and drag. These 4 forces govern every single moment of every flight. Understanding them is absolutely fundamental to understanding aviation. We'll explore how wings actually generate lift, and it's not quite what you might think. Why weight isn't just about how heavy the aircraft is. how thrust overcomes drag, and the delicate balance that keeps aircraft flying. The next time you see something flying overhead, you'll see it differently now. You'll ask yourself, is that lighter than air or heavier than air? Fixed wing or rotary wing? Powered or unpowered? And yes, that delivery drone buzzing past is just as much an aircraft as the 777 crossing the Atlantic. They both derive their support from the atmosphere. Thanks for watching. Keep looking up and see you in the next one.